Some of you know philosophy, Nick, I believe, mentioned Guszcza yesterday, so if you know a little bit about Greek, the word philosophy is a Greek word that means pre-unemployment. So I did this at the University of Chicago, by the way. I studied philosophy of physics at the University of Chicago. I did it out of intrinsic motivation as intellectual curiosity. I knew I needed to make a living, so I just checked off the boxes. I can go to law school. I'm a humanities guy, right? No, I don't want to do that. I can go to work on Wall Street. Well, no, I don't want to do that either. They'd eat me alive. Did land a job if I turned it down. So I went for the fame and fortune of becoming an actuary at Allstate Insurance Company in Northbrook, Illinois. I did it for the glamour mostly. No, I had in mind that this could be a way of what we now call data science, but we just didn't have that term back then. I'm a very old man, so the word data science had not been crafted back then. But I heard that Allstate had this research center in Menlo Park, California. When I was interviewing, I thought, oh, okay, that sounds interesting. Went there in 1999, during the first dot-com bubble. That's where I learned machine learning and data science. I built Allstate's first credit scoring model. And this is not the focus of my talk, but there was a little bit of psychology there too, because what I saw was that I've been analyzing all these risk factors for insurance at home office to do our regulatory filing support stuff. And what I saw when I started building credit models at Allstate was that credit score was not just correlated with who's going to crash their car or have a homeowner's claim. It was one of the top 4 or 5 actuarial predictors of who's going to crash their car. So in addition to being fascinated by learning all the data science, I was just fascinated by, like, why is this so strong? Because this is credit data generated by your banking transactions. And of course, I quickly came to this kind of like homemade, intuitive, I'd love to talk with you guys about this. Like, credit is clearly a psychobehavioral proxy, right? So this is a canary in the coal mine example, something that's become ubiquitous since then, which is that our daily transactions, our daily activities are digitally mediated. We're talking about Facebook now. But back then in those old days, those data sources were supermarket club card data and credit data. And I remember when I was building Allstate's credit scoring model, I thought, God, what if Allstate had a tie-up with Safeway Supermarket? Couldn't we use their data? The 16-year-old male motorcycle driver who also reads Martha Stewart Living and eats organic produce, right? Wouldn't he be a good insurance risk? By analogy with a 16-year-old male motorcycle driver with good credit. Well, you know what? I actually wrote a memo about that, which my colleagues read and filed away. But 10 years later, I'm working at a consulting firm. I was summoned to a grocery chain in Europe that sold motor insurance. And we did exactly that. We used supermarket club card data. Now, this is something we can talk about during the Q&A. Can we start using this big data for pro-social uses? Again, not the focus of my talk, but I'd love to talk about this during Q&A. I believe that behavioral insights, behavioral economics, the stuff that I've been very inspired by your colleague Richard Thaler, I think this might be an interesting way to kind of take big data and combine it and bake in human factors to create new business models. That's, again, not where I'm going with this. So this is a 2-part talk. So what Ravi said completely strongly resonated with me, that this stuff is dominated too much by engineers. I think there are kind of 2 notions of data science at this point, roughly speaking. One is the sort of like high volume, low feature data, like pixels and gazillions of photographs, right? The reason we have artificial intelligence now is the mobile phone. Everybody's uploading all these pictures. We can digitize them. The 20 by 20, matrix of pixels are the X variables, right? Deep learning creates all these features kind of on the fly, and we can say, yeah, this is a guy about to break his neck because he's surfboarding or something like that. So you can label photographs. So that's one form of data science, which really is kind of a form of engineering. That's not what I do. I'm frankly personally not that interested in it, although I realize it's very valuable. Another type of data science is what I've been doing for all these years at Deloitte, and I've been struggling, it's been this long quest to try to articulate this. There's more medium-sized data sets, right, which are higher feature, lower volume data, where a lot of the information doesn't just come from the data, right? There's this kind of dogma of data science that all the information is in the data. Well, no, a lot of the information that you need is in the minds of the users who are going to use your algorithm, right? And in my experience, there's a strong business motivation to take on board this little bit of advice from Don Norman. The problem with the designs of most engineers is they're too logical. We have to accept human behavior the way it is, not the way we wish it would be. I believe that on analogy with user-centered design of physical devices like this, clicker or a tea kettle, we need user-centered design for data science, right? We need to kind of like account for human factors. We need to account for the way it's going to be used by the end user, right? So if he or she feels like there's just information that he or she understands that's out there, but this model is being built behind closed doors by some clueless data scientist that doesn't understand this, just kind of like blindly looking at the data, they're not going to use it. They won't trust it, and with good reason. And there are these kind of like scary, surprising statistics that even though everybody's talking about big data and the importance of data science and data science as a service and just get some data and wave your magic wand over it and your business problems are going to be solved. Well, it doesn't really work that way. A lot of companies are spending a lot of money on hiring teams of data scientists because it's such a sexy topic right now, but they're not realizing value from it. I know some like very large organizations that are household names that have big teams of data scientists that aren't realizing any value. And I think that a root cause is this kind of like, this lack of connection between the people using the algorithms and the people who are building the algorithms. All right. So that's one analogy. And I kind of backed into this way of thinking by reading Richard Thaler, actually, and I'll get to that. So so I'm not talking so much about data science for well-being, the way Ryan was talking about, the way many of our speakers were talking about yesterday, or Tristan, although I think that's very important. I would love it if I could speak in a future conference about that, because I want Deloitte to get more involved in this, maybe through the employee well-being angle. I'm talking to Adam Ghazali, for example. What I want to talk about is more in the Dan Goldstein genre of data science that makes us smarter, okay? And I've read Daniel Kahneman. Again, I'm an amateur psychologist, and well, there's two different types of mental operations, right? There's thinking slow and thinking fast. So classically, I think data scientists assume that this is all about thinking slow, and a lot of it is, right? So my original killer application in my work at Deloitte Consulting was sort of Moneyball for insurance. So I transitioned from building models for personal insurance at Allstate to building models to help commercial insurance underwriters better select and price risks for things like insuring this hospital or insuring this hipster pickle boutique or insuring this bike repair store, right? So there are fewer data points, there are fewer businesses than there are cars, and those businesses are much more heterogeneous. So you can't build this like super R-squared model that's just going to do all the work. You can't automate it. You can't take humans out of the loop, right? In personal insurance, to an extent you can, right? Like Flo from Progressive pushes a button, and she gives you a quote for car insurance, right? And she's worried she'll be replaced by the Flo bot, right? Because this is automated. But we never tried to replace human underwriters. We never thought that was possible for commercial insurance. And I suspect it never will be, although I could be proven wrong by that until we solve the general AI problem. And I couldn't quite articulate why what we were doing made sense. And we were being paid a lot of money by these organizations to build what I considered simple models, kind of like the thing that Dan Goldstein was talking about yesterday. It's like all these risk factors were things they understood. And I couldn't believe that our clients were paying us to build models for things they understood. But they weren't acting on it. So when I read Moneyball, but then the real light bulb went off for me when I read Thaler and Sunstein's review of Moneyball. We had stumbled across an inefficient market, right? Like in Moneyball, it was an inefficient market in the sense that the price of the asset didn't reflect all the available information about the asset. The assets of the baseball players, the prices, their salaries, there's publicly available information that wasn't being used because the underwriters were using biased thinking fast rather than systematic assessments of evidence thinking slow kind of stuff. Well, it was the same thing in insurance, right? The underwriters kind of knew the factors, but they were kind of like using some of their knowledge, but they're also kind of using a lot of heuristics. Like, well, the last risk I wrote had a deep fat fire in the kitchen. That didn't go so well, so I'm not going to underwrite this risk. There's a deep fat fire in the kitchen. So you might overgeneralize from personal experience, right? You do much better if you have a algorithm that helps you make those kind of case-by-case decisions. Kind of on analogy with an emergency room, where you can have like a simple decision tree model, right? That will help the doctor better triage the patients, even though it's not telling the doctor anything he didn't already know. But it's hugely valuable. It can save lives, right? So it was worth a lot of money. And so I kind of backed into being interested in psychology by kind of reading this kind of like literature, and I kind of uncovered, the Paul Meehl. It was ironic. I'm a data scientist by becoming an actuary. Well, Meehl wrote Clinical versus Actuarial Judgment, right? So psychologists have known this for a long time, that even simple regression models, the kind of thing that Dan Goldstein was talking about yesterday, run circles around unaided judgment, right? But we're not going to use those simple models necessarily to always replace humans. If you guys disagree, please tell me. So, human judgment is not merely worse than optimal regression equations, they're worse than almost any regression equation. It was reading stuff like this, and then Robin Dawes's stuff on unit weight models that Dan Goldstein alluded to yesterday that made me realize that, yeah, it's like, contrary to the dogma that we had when we started our practice, where we assumed that what we were doing made sense because of our data and our algorithms, and we're using fancy machine learning. Not really. No, it was this kind of stuff. We were using algorithms to ameliorate kind of flaws in human judgment, right? So I had this analogy, right? And in the same way that my eyes are myopic, so I wear glasses, well, Kahneman teaches us that our brains are myopic, our thinking fast brains are myopic, so we need regression models as kind of like eyeglasses for the mind's eye, okay? And they actually wanted to make a movie about this, but I turned Aaron Sorkin down when they said that they wanted to have Steve Buscemi star as me instead of Brad Pitt, but it's okay. So I always, when I talk to non-psychology audiences about this, I always use the Linda story to kind of illustrate this. Like thinking fast tells you that Linda's a feminist bank teller. Thinking slow tells you that Linda's a bank teller. And there's always this kind of nod of recognition. So that's bias. And there's also the noise story. And I know this has been disputed, but there's that Israeli judge story, right? You're more likely to get parole if it's 9 o'clock in the morning than if it's 10:30 in the morning, because the judge's blood sugar level might influence his or her decisions, right? So Nate, next time you're up for parole, remember that. So obviously, this kind of gets to the point that experts need algorithms, but I've always known that the algorithms are not enough. Okay. Now, like even Paul, a lot of this literature suggests that humans override algorithms too much. So you should really just shut off human judgment whenever you can and just rely on the algorithm. And I think that will be true a lot of the times, but I don't think it's always true. I gave one reason, which is sort of epistemic in nature. In the commercial insurance example, there's just not enough data, to have all the information. So you want to use the algorithm to do something, to help the human do something the human's not good at, okay? But you want to use what the human is good at, which is kind of like understanding of the data generating process to design your model, right? That's the design thinking I'm talking about. There's also the issue of justice, procedural justice, right? So, and this is why I asked Dan Goldstein about the other F, fairness, yesterday, right? We realized this for a long time. Even when I was at Allstate, I was worried about the possible disparate impact of my credit scoring model. So even though income or race or gender or whatever was not in the model, there was no disparate treatment. We were worried about disparate impact. So that was something we definitely took into account. I think these conversations are much more prevalent now because algorithms are much more prevalent. So we have ProPublica doing studies about the most commonly used recidivism model. They find that the false positive rate for blacks is twice as high as the false positive rate for whites in the most commonly used recidivism algorithm. So clearly, judges need help from algorithms, but at the same time, algorithms can have their own sets of biases. So you've got this idea of we need this kind of way for humans and computers or humans and algorithms to work together. And this is not a statistical topic per se, I don't think. It's not about building the model of the highest R squared, high five, let's go home. But it's more like we need to design a model that's part of a holistic human algorithm interaction system somehow, right? And I asked Dan Goldstein this yesterday. Is this a thing? Is this a subject of study? And I'm not sure it is. But we've sort of been muddling through this all these years at Deloitte, right? And so we've built simple models. We've tried to build interpretable models. We train our algorithms, our underwriters, to use the models. I've read about how Phil Tetlock and Barbara Mellers at Wharton try to give people, sort of probability rationality training. So we've thought about doing that for our underwriters too, right? So it's this idea of really trying to optimize a human-computer interaction system, not just an algorithm. And I feel like that involves both data science and psychology. So I really liked your Venn diagram. And I think that these kind of horse and buggy thoughts are relevant when we kind of enter the age of AI. I don't want to make any great claims for the technical sophistication of what I've been doing all these years, but I do think this is relevant as we enter into the age of AI, because there's this, in the same way there's been a lot of kind of big data hype and big data dogma, I feel like now there's a lot of AI hype and a lot of AI dogma, right? There's this kind of implicit assumption that the data has all the answers. Technology is going to evolve no matter what we do. We just have to kind of accept what technology wants, and there we go. No, I really think we should try to figure out the real challenge is how do we encode human values and human psychology into our algorithms to create things that are complements to us, not replacements to us. And I was very fortunate enough to interview Sandy Pentland a year or so ago, or a year and a half ago, and I pressed him on this because he has the same shared professorship at MIT, I think, that Marvin Minsky used to have. And so I asked him, well, what do you think about what Minsky wanted? Because Minsky was famously one of the founders of artificial intelligence. I mean, he advised Stanley Kubrick in the movie 2001. He made a statement a long time ago that, AI will become so smart that we'll be like pets by comparison. And people would ask him, well, aren't you worried about that? And he said, well, no, I treat my dog well. And it's like, A, why would we build that? B, is it possible? Now, this is back in the heyday of logical positivism when we thought we could kind of create a perfect language to express knowledge. It was like behaviorism. So maybe back then it seemed like you could build an artificial brain, an artificial human, and put it into a computer. That doesn't seem so clear now. So this is what Sandy said. He said, Marvin Minsky was advocating what's called common sense reasoning. Machines have shown essentially no examples of doing that. Therefore, they're complements to people. People are actually not so bad at that. However, people are somewhat lousy at tuning things and keeping exact accounts of stuff, kind of the Kahneman thing, right? Machines are good at that. That gives us the idea that there could be a human-machine partnership, all right? That's what I love. And I feel like that's what we've been doing all these years. I feel like that's the vision we should have for AI going forward. And there's a very nice, maybe a metaphor for what, example, or maybe a metaphor for what Sandy was talking about that Gary Kasparov wrote down in the New York Review of Books about 7 years ago. So Kasparov was famous. This is kind of the prequel to IBM Watson, right? IBM Deep Blue beating Gary Kasparov, the world chess champion, was in 1997. And about 8 years after that, there's kind of like a twist ending to this prequel, all right? There's a competition called freestyle chess. Anybody know this story, freestyle chess? Good. There was a competition called freestyle chess out of Germany, I think. It was a website. Anybody could enter. So I could enter. I could enter teaming up with Gary Kasparov. I could enter teaming up with Gary Kasparov and IBM Deep Blue. Or maybe I could leave just sort of make him stupider. So it could be any combination of human and computers entering this competition. And there's an upset victory. Two amateurs named Zach and Steven, these like kind of young, 20-something guys from New Hampshire, were working with 3 laptops, each equipped with a different chess program, ordinary laptops. They won freestyle chess. And Kasparov commented on this. He says, Zach and Steven's skill at manipulating and coaching their computers to look very deeply into positions effectively counteracted the superior chess understanding of the grandmaster opponents and the greater computational power of the other participants. Weak human plus machine plus a better process for working together was superior to a strong computer alone and superior to a strong human machine in an inferior process. So my comment is that creating such processes goes beyond data science. Psychology and design thinking are needed. Okay? So again, that's like the human-centered design is necessary if we're going to create these systems of human and computers working together. And again, I like to think of freestyle chess as being a nice metaphor for humans' relationship for technology. So it's kind of like a future of work kind of comment. Like in domain after domain after domain, think of doctors making diagnoses, right? So maybe radiology, maybe much of that can be automated in a certain sense because, those x-rays with the tumors are, again, these like low-feature, high-volume data sets. I'm not saying radiologists go away. Maybe they're needed in the same way that we need pilots, for when autopilot fails, right? But sure, the stuff you have to really study hard for, that can be kind of automated away. Maybe doctors making diagnoses are more like my insurance underwriters. And maybe what we really need to reward more are people at the other end of the spectrum, like health coaches and nurses who can give kind of like one-on-one customized treatment. Like that's kind of a behavioral intervention, right? Maybe those people should really be, paid a lot more. And it's interesting that requires less education, more like intrinsically human capabilities. So I think freestyle X, or if even for call center operators, right now they're treated like robots. They're given scripts to read. But maybe if we tap into intrinsic motivation of call center operators and say, use your common sense, right? Sandy said computers are bad at common sense. Use your common sense, use your empathy, use these. So again, so data scientists need to understand psychology better so we can understand what are humans good at versus what are we not so good at, so we can kind of pair up the two skills. And so again, Don Norman, same guy. The problems we face with technology are fundamental. We need a calmer, more reliable, more humane approach. We need augmentation, not automation. Can I just have 2 more minutes? 2?
I think we should get going with the
okay.
And then you can incorporate what you're going to say into the...
Okay. The other thing I was going to say is we're making behavioral nudges into our work. That was actually the most exciting thing I was going to say. But we can talk about that during the panel. Okay.